Okay. Are we recording? We are recording.
Yes.
Great. My name is Holly Fingerly. I'm the founder of Save Our Southland, co-founder of Save Our Southland, and the chair of Indivisible South Suburban. And we're here to talk about the Fair Tax Amendment with Jean Pierce from League of Women Voters Illinois and Ann Corder. They are both the tax specialists with the League. State Representative Debbie Meyers Martin of Illinois' 38th District, and Mario Reed, a local property tax appeals lawyer and a Rich East graduate and a South Holland resident. So welcome, everyone. I'm going to turn it over to Jean, and she's got a short slideshow.
Okay, thank you. There we go. So I appreciate your inviting us to speak tonight. I am Jean Pierce with the Illinois State League of Women Voters, and Ann Corder is joining me. The League has actually been supporting having a graduated rate income tax for the past 50 years. And with COVID, it's needed now more than ever. Now, on my ballot, it was right here in the, in the center of the middle column. On other ballots, it's still at the top, but it's in the left-hand column. So it is at the top of your ballot. We'll go through the wording later on. So here's what we're going to talk about tonight. What's wrong with the current system? What is the fair tax? What will it do for us? And how do we pass it? The League is part of a nonpartisan ballot committee, which is a coalition of faith-based education organizations, unions, human service organizations. I like to point out that this picture was taken pre-COVID when it was actually safe to sit next to each other. And so we've been giving dozens of presentations about this and trying to enlist people's support for it. So let's start with what's wrong about the system currently. Two basic things: it's unfair and it's inadequate. It's unfair because it's falling too heavily on the middle class and those struggling to get there. It's inadequate because it causes budget deficits, ridiculously high property taxes, cuts in services for schools, public services, and so on. So our current flat tax dates back to the 1970s when the Constitution was passed. And actually, the League didn't think it was a good idea back then, and we still don't think it's a good idea. The problem is that the Constitution has this requirement that all taxpayers have to pay income at the same rate, regardless of their income and ability to pay. So, of course, a family making $25,000 and a family making $25 million are paying income taxes at the same rate. And we can't modernize our system until we change the Constitution. So here's the basic problem. Over the past 40 years, when you look at where has the income growth gone, it's gone to the top 1%. They've seen an increase of 254% in their income over the past 40 years, whereas the bottom 90% has seen an increase of 20%. And if you look at the bottom did I say 90? I meant 99% has seen a minimal increase. The bottom 90% has actually seen a decrease of 8% over that same time period. So we've all heard about the wealth gap. This is a visual that makes it real clear that really the only income increase has gone to the top 1%. And yet, look at what our current state and local taxes are doing. When we look at excise, property, income, sales, the whole 9 yards, the lowest 20% of income earners are paying over 14% of their income in these combined taxes, whereas the top 1%, the only ones who have seen any sizable growth in their income, are paying about half that, just over 7% of their income in these combined taxes. And this has had made real problems for education and other human services. Holly, there's someone waiting in. Okay, so despite the constitutional requirement that the state fund 50% of education, currently the state is only paying 27% of the cost of public education, compared to other states which are providing 47% of the cost of public education. Now, the federal government provides about 8%, but who's left to pick up the rest? Well, we look at our local municipalities, and their recourse is property taxes. So currently, property taxes are funding about 2/3 of the cost of public education in Illinois, compared to other states where it's closer to 45%. Similarly, we've seen decreases in funding for core services over the past 20 years. When we look at the budget from 2000 and adjusted for inflation and population, and compare that to the budget for 2021, we see higher education was cut by close to 49%. Healthcare has been cut in those past 20 years, over 18%. Human services, close to 15%. Public safety, about 20%. The net average of cuts in these core human services is over 20% in the past 20 years. So some people would say, well, you just need to cut spending. Where are you going to cut it? We've already endured horrific cuts over the past 20 years in our core services. In addition to this, we have seen serious cuts for the Illinois EPA. In 2003, they were hiring 1,200 workers who were monitoring pollution, air, water, and the ground. In 2018, this was cut almost in half to 639 people who were monitoring pollution. And we know that this is disproportionately affecting Black and Brown communities, as are all of the cuts that I described. So what we'd like to do is stop here right now and see if there are any questions about the problems of the current situation before we go on and talk about what the fair tax is going to be and do for us. And have there been any?
Nothing in the chat. No.
Nothing in the chat. Well, then let's keep going. And I'm sure that questions will arise. So what we like people to do, is to think through, how have these cuts affected you? How has the current situation, which has been terribly exacerbated by the flat tax, affected you, your friends, your relatives? And so a story that I tell people is about my grandson. I have a 6-year-old grandson who's hearing impaired. By the time he's an adult, he's going to be totally deaf. And so the level of public schooling that he gets right now is incredibly important. And yet he lives in a district that has only 60% funding for adequacy. So they're nowhere near adequate funding in his district. He's not going to get the services that he needs at this crucial point in his life, unless we can get more revenue. And certainly whether or not the evidence-based funding model of education is going to continue seeing more revenue is definitely based on whether or not the fair tax passes. So what is the fair tax? This is not some bizarre new concept in Illinois. The majority of states, about 32 of them, already use a fair tax system. So does the federal government. We're accustomed to this through the IRS. In fact, Illinois is one of only 4 states to mandate a flat tax in our Constitution. So here's the wording that you'll see on your ballot. And particularly this highlighted part is what I want to draw your attention to. It says that the amendment would remove the portion of the revenue article of the Constitution that's sometimes referred to as a flat tax that requires all taxes on income to be at the same rate. So you'll notice we are not voting on the rates, and we are not eliminating the possibility that legislators in the future could decide to use a flat tax. It is not either or. When people vote for this, if this passes, we will then have the option of either a flat tax or a fair tax in the future. A fair tax, of course, meaning a graduated rate one. So we, of course, hope that people will vote yes for this constitutional amendment. And what will it mean for us? It means that 97% of us will see no income tax increase. A majority of middle and lower income families are going to receive a tax cut. And in fact, only those making more than $250,000 a year will actually pay more. So here's what the rate structure looks like. Recognize that currently our flat tax is 4.95%. For the first $10,000 that you earn, that would be taxed at a rate of 4.75%. The first dollar that you earn over 10,000 on up to 100,000 would be taxed at a rate of 4.90%. Now this is the same for single filers and for joint filers. However, when we get over 250,000, then the first dollar over 250,000 on up to 350 for single or on up to 500,000 for joint filers would be taxed at a rate of 7.75%. Now, the exception to this is the highest bracket. So for single filers earning over 750,000 or for joint filers earning over 1 million, their entire income would be taxed at the 7.99% rate. We see over here the percent of taxpayers affected. Altogether, over people earning over $250,000 is just about 3% of our state. And people earning over in the top bracket here is 0.3% of Illinoisans. In addition, the rate structure bill would expand the property tax credit from 5% to 6% and implements a child tax credit up to $100 per child up to 17 years of age for families earning up to $100,000. You can see how the fair tax would affect your family if you go to bit.ly/FIT is fair income tax, FIT calculator. So you can find what your family would save with this. So here's how the fair tax compares to other surrounding states. This is our current 4.95% flat rate. The red line is for, and we're really looking at middle income earners here. So the red line is basically the same, and it would increase at 250,000. This is Missouri. Missouri for middle income earners are paying a higher tax rate than the proposed or current in Illinois. Now, you can hardly see this one. It's Kentucky. It's just at 5%, slightly higher than the current and proposed in Illinois for the middle income earners. Now, this is Indiana, and I know we hear that Indiana's state income tax is lower than Illinois, but in Indiana, they not only have a state income tax, they also have a county income tax. So this line represents if you lived in Indianapolis, you would be taxed by the state of Indiana and also by Marion County. And so you would be paying a higher tax rate than if you lived in Chicago. These are the rates for Wisconsin for middle class incomes and in Iowa. And despite the fact that it's not going to impact our middle and income and lower income earners, it's going to bring in about $3 billion in funding for education, public safety, human services, healthcare, and the environment. It's also going to help small businesses and corporations. It's going to allow for smart investing in job training and entrepreneurial programs and higher education. We saw how seriously higher education has been cut over the past 20 years. So small businesses are, many of them are S corporations, and so the individual taxpayers are paying taxes on their profit, and they will not see an increase in their income tax unless their profit exceeds $250,000 a year. Holly, someone's in the waiting room. So are there questions about what the fair tax is, what it means, what it will do for us, and the rate structure?
I guess I was thinking maybe this is a good point to address whether or not this is a blank check.
Okay, is this a blank check for legislators? To be honest, legislators already have the power to increase or decrease taxes. We are not giving them any new power in that regard. They have always been able to increase or decrease taxes. The only restriction was that they've been stuck with doing it for everybody with a flat tax across the board. So no, this is not a change in that power. Is this going to make it more likely that they would increase taxes on middle and lower income earners during a COVID crisis? I mean, the absurdity of that, I think, is you know, why would they increase taxes on 97% of their voters? No, not likely. However, the caveat, if this does not pass, there is a strong possibility that we will see an increase in the flat tax from 4.95% up to 5.95%. We are still going to need to have $3 billion, and that would help, you know, raise that money for us. So what do we have to do to pass the fair tax? It has to be approved by voters in the election. It takes either a yes vote of more than 50% of those voting, or a yes vote of more than 60% of those voting on the question. And the way that I like to explain this is, supposing we have only 200 people voting in the election, and 100 of them don't get intimidated by seeing a lot of words and decide to vote on the amendment. And 61 of those who vote on it vote yes. We would not have more than 50% of those voting in the election, because 61 is not more than 50% of 200. But we would have more than 60% of those voting on the question. So what we need is for people to spread the words to families and friends and neighbors, sign on as an endorser, join us in educating target voters, spread the word on social media, write a letter to the editor. I'm sure there are still some yard signs available. I can tell you where you could get them in your region. We're also encouraging people to develop an elevator speech, which is about 30 seconds long, no jargon. Tells the purpose for this, the benefits, and ask them to support it. So here's my elevator speech. Our best hope of funding programs that address problems highlighted during the COVID crisis is a fair tax. This would raise taxes on the only segment of society which has seen an increase in income in recent decades, people earning over $250,000. That's why I'm voting for the fair tax, and I hope you do too. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen, and we're open for questions.
Jean, I've heard some people upset that this was an amendment to the Constitution, and I think that they're under the impression that this is like a constitutional convention. Talk about that.
Right. There are several ways of amending the Constitution, and no, this is the only thing that is being addressed in the ballot. Only the whether our income can be taxed at a graduated rate. Nothing else is on the table with this vote.
Anyone else have any questions for Jean? Thank you so much, Jean.
Sure thing. And I see that you have yard signs. So
I do. I put my contact information in the chat. So if anyone wants one, let me know and I'll be happy to drop them off if they're local, or I've got other connections. We can find somebody close to you to drop one.
And I have access to buttons. If anybody would like some buttons, I will mail them to you. So I will put my email in the chat box as well.
Great.
Okay.
Rep. Meyers Martin, would you like to say something? And I guess one of the questions I was hoping you'd address is I'm hearing a lot of how can we trust our Illinois politicians with this? And I'm hoping that you can.
Okay. Okay. Oh, well, am I unmuted? Okay, great. Well, first of all, thank you, Holly, for hosting this meeting. I think it's very important for people to have the opportunity to ask questions, the opportunity to hear real facts rather than some of the spin that we've heard on television. So I really, really do thank you. Thank Jean for providing such wonderful information in her slides and explaining it at a level that most people can understand of the difference between a flat tax and a graduated tax and why it's important for our state. And so to address your question about how can you trust legislators, I will say, if we look at the fact that legislators have always had the power to raise taxes. They just had to raise it across the board because it was a flat tax. This amendment and a vote for approval of this measure would allow the rates to be different for people who make over $250,000. So I would say, as far as the trust level goes, probably in the last 10 years, maybe a little longer, the income tax rate has only been raised twice. The last time being Governor Quinn, when it went from 3.5% or so up to the point it is now. So there is no political will in Springfield, I can attest to, for raising taxes. Because people know that when they go back to their district, they're going to have to explain why on earth they would do that. So there's no political will. I just think that this is a fairer and more equitable way to make the state more profitable in terms of revenue by raising the rates and not having people who are making over 250,000 paying the same rate as someone who makes $40,000. It just makes no sense. And we can tell that by the other states that have gone to a graduated income tax. And so that is how I would answer that question, that there really is no political will on the minds or hearts of legislators to do that.
And it seems, in my impression, is that you're under an awful lot of pressure to do something about our property taxes, especially in this region.
Absolutely.
This is part of that solution to transfer the revenue source from property taxes to fund our schools to the income tax, like Jean showed in the slides.
That is correct. And I agree with Jean that the state really does need to find a way to fund education better than we do, at a better rate than we currently do, because it's constitutionally required by the state to do that. And this is just one avenue. And as Jean also pointed out, so again, thank you, Jean, you only can cut so much. And then you have your citizens suffering. And that doesn't work like a corporation or a business, because in government, you are there to serve people and their needs. So cutting is not always the answer.
Two of the other pieces of misinformation, you mentioned misinformation and spin. Two of the ones that I'm hearing a lot of is about retirement tax and businesses, the effect on small businesses. Could you address those two myths?
Well, I think Jean spoke to it basically, that most small businesses are very small entities, and certainly their taxes would not be raised if their profit margin was less than 250,000. So I really don't have a lot of detail on why small businesses are fearful of this. But again, I believe it's because there's a lack of information and a lack of education.
I saw an article from IPI that mentioned something about this included an increase on small business corporate taxes and the replacement taxes. And I haven't seen any evidence of that. So I don't know where that's coming from. So I wanted to clear up that myth.
Okay.
And can talk about the corporate.
There is an increase in the corporate rate for C corporations from the current 7% up to 7.99%. So large, really big companies will see a small tax increase under this. The small businesses, though, unless they're making above $250,000 in profit, will not see any increases. If they're making at the level of $1 million in profit, they will see an increase of up to 7.99%, along with individuals who are getting a salary at that rate. If they're making a profit at that rate, it'll show up on their individual tax returns, and they will pay 7.99%. So IBI is saying, whoa, you're going to have an up to 47% increase in your taxes. Well, that's probably, I don't know, less than a dozen businesses will be in that category. And they're frightening 1.2 million small businesses who are nowhere near that income level. So look at their language, up to 47%. Most will see a decrease in their taxes.
And that seems to be what I'm fighting on Nextdoor and on Facebook, the small that are going to get hit with it. And
you also mentioned about retirement. And the AARP and other retirement organizations have come out very strongly in support of the graduated rate income tax, because they see this as the way to prevent the state from increasing the flat tax on everyone, and imposing a retirement tax, that the state needs more income. And if the state can get it by imposing higher taxes on higher income earners, they will not need to tax retirement income.
Exactly.
Yeah, they can raise taxes on retirement income today if they had any political will to do so. This fair tax does not make it any easier to do that, to make all of those seniors really angry with them. The fair tax will only make it less necessary to go for the retirement tax.
Right.
And seniors are a very strong voting bloc. So once again, legislators think twice before.
Yes. Yes.
Dean, you raised a point that I've heard over and over again from those who oppose the fair tax, which is you mentioned that Illinois needs more income. And they kind of use the analogy of a household. You have to cut spending, you have to live within your means. And I was wondering if any or all of you could shed some light on what that kind of cut would mean. That would actually make a meaningful dent in that deficit. What kinds of services would that mean we're losing? What would that mean for kids in our schools or people that rely on social services? If you could offer some specific examples, I think that would be helpful to illustrate why that's really not an option.
Right. We've seen cuts over the past 20 years. I showed you that higher ed has been cut close to 50%. We've lost 7,500 positions in higher education. We've lost a lot of our young people going to other states for their higher education. And they're likely to stay in those other states and not come back. So you know, that's just one example. We've seen,
yeah, and if I could just piggyback on that, that has had an especially hard effect on Black and Brown communities, because the MAP grants have been cut, and there's less access to higher education for those communities. Tuition has increased greatly. And so the combination of those things has foreclosed a route to the middle class for many families.
And actually add some context to that specific example, because I recently moved to the area from Carbondale, where I lived for 4 years, during the time when we had no state budget. And so the university that is the heart and soul of the economy of that town was taking it from all sides. Students couldn't afford to go to college because the assistance wasn't there. The university couldn't afford to subsidize them or expand or grow programs because they weren't getting the state funding. And as a result of that, when people started, you know, the professors, all the support staff that started getting cut, that really took a hit on property values in the area. There were houses for sale, multiple houses on every block, which just put more upward pressure on property tax rates so that those who were behind could still fund the schools.
Yeah, and certainly with COVID, we have increased pressures on our state to fairly fund healthcare and you know, remote education, the whole 9 yards, and yet. You know, the governor is saying that unless we can get more revenue coming into the state, we're going to have to do some more belt tightening, and we're going to see some more cuts. And as I mentioned, that one thing that's very near and dear to Ann and my heart is education funding. We were so thrilled when the evidence-based funding model passed and started being implemented in 2017. And the state held up its share of the bargain for 3 years. They funded that, but they weren't able to fund it this year because of COVID. And what we understand is unless this passes, we're not going to have any hope of getting more equitable funding for education for a long time.
Illinois has the most inequitable school system in the country between rich districts and districts with lower property values. So you get schools in Dalton and Calumet City, Chicago Heights and Ford Heights, who are terribly underfunded relative to the North Shore schools. Those children do not have the same access to quality education and the kinds of services that they need. So the idea of having an evidence-based funding model to target those districts and get them the resources that they need to go forward, that offered a real hope that we would finally get out of last place in the country. So if we don't get additional funding, we will not get where we need to be, and we will not have a place where education doesn't depend on your zip code.
It's interesting you mentioned Calumet City. I taught at TF North High School for 3 years, and after that for 6 years at Kankakee High School. And so I've seen firsthand what that looks like. I remember at Kankakee, we had a need for a social worker, just one social worker to serve the 1,200 students that came to that high school. And we didn't have a way to fund that position. What we're seeing now is there's huge teacher and educator shortages across the state as well. And if you just look over the past couple of years, the big growth in those shortage areas have been in support staff like counselors for schools, social workers that serve kids' needs. And what we are seeing is because of that evidence-based funding formula, which is a very similar and related fight here that made it more equitable, schools now were able to offer those positions and people weren't yet able to step in there because they can't pay a wage yet that will compete with their other job opportunities. And so without additional funding to continue to add into that really good funding formula we have, if there's no inputs into the formula, there's no outputs in terms of results for students. And it's such an important thing that we have that revenue for kids.
And Bill, one of the things that I've been passionate about this summer, especially since George Floyd, is educating myself about systemic racial injustice and what that looks like in all the different problems that we face, and in the South suburbs with a community that is predominantly of color. The more I thought about changing from a flat tax, a regressive tax, to a graduated tax, thought of what a game changer this would be. The Shriver Poverty Law Center did a presentation where they looked at what's happened to communities of color over the past 20 years and saw that it took $4 billion out of the pockets of people that make $250,000 or less that are Latinx or Black over the past 20 years, while the predominantly white families above that 250,000 enriched themselves by $7.5 million. And it just billion, I'm sorry, billion. Yeah, both of those were billions. So it was mind-boggling to me. And one of the reasons that I asked Mario to be on this call, this might be a good segue for Mario since we're on a schedule here. We have about 15 minutes left. I noticed his posts about injustice and race. And he is a property tax appeals lawyer that is all about building his community and building wealth and wanting the best for families, wanting the best for his community. And just wanted to give you a chance, Mario, to chat about the fair tax and how it fits into this whole tax puzzle. And then maybe some of your thoughts about what you would tell someone about does this really attack racial injustice? I had some people who said taxes can't be racist. When a legislator tells me they're going to do something to address economic injustice and race, I think they're pulling my leg. So I'm going to let you speak.
Well, thanks a bunch, Holly. I greatly appreciate the invitation, and I'd like to thank all of the other speakers who have presented, as it has been very informative even for myself, and I'm someone who's studied a lot of this. So I'd like to say thank you, Gene, because a lot of those slides are very, very helpful, as State Representative Meyers said. And it's very interesting because State Representative Debbie Martin Meyers and myself, we did a lot of tax appeal workshops together, and we traveled all over Cook County, which for those who don't know, it's about the same square mileage as Rhode Island. So there's a lot of territory to Cook County. And we would travel all over the county, and we would participate in these property tax workshops. And it was always interesting because it'd be very different depending upon what part of Cook County we were in. And that really kind of speaks to the tale of really the racial part of it. So I'm all for a graduated income tax, and it's in large part because I understand what goes into it. But to anybody who says, well, why wouldn't we have everyone paying the same percentage? I say, you know what? Fine, let's do that, and let's do it across the board for all taxes. So I want to pay the same property tax percentage as Burr Ridge does, even though I live in South Holland. And that's the part which is really about kind of the racial component of it. The south suburbs of Chicago have the highest average composite property tax rate in the United States of America. My homeland, I grew up in Park Forest, Illinois, in a pretty well-known house, the Chinese House of Park Forest, that Ted Slowick actually did an article about very recently. And it was a case where I grew up there my entire childhood, and I wanted to move back to Park Forest after I went off to law school and became an attorney. I could not go back to Park Forest because I couldn't afford a home based on the property taxes. My mortgage broker told me that I could not live there because I wouldn't be able to get a house anywhere close to what I've been able to get in South Holland, because the average composite tax rate in Park Forest, which is the highest in all of Cook County, is 35%. Now, to put that into perspective, on the other end of the spectrum in Burr Ridge, which is also part of Cook County, their average composite tax rate is 7.4%. And these numbers are according to the Cook County Clerk's recent report that came out in June about the tax rates. So I'm perfectly okay if everyone says, let's have the same flat tax rate, as long as we do it for everything, including property taxes, because I'm more than happy to go down to a 7% or even a 10%, as opposed to the 19% that I'm currently paying in South Holland, which is one of the lowest in the south suburbs. And that's really kind of the racial component of it. So anyone who says, hey, taxes can't be racist or it can't be based on one's race, look at our property tax rate, our property tax rates, which, by the way, most of us spend far more in property taxes than we do on income taxes. So because of that, I would argue that this would absolutely be a game changer, because it would hopefully level the playing field in that regard. And when it comes to property tax appeals, which is what it is that I do as a part of the practice, ultimately, I'm harming individuals by telling the assessor, hey, their values are lower than what it is. We already currently deal with that. So the only way I can provide reprieve and a little bit of a kind of savings for them is to go and tell the assessor, reduce the value of their property. So not only am I trying to help them in that regard, I'm forcing them to try and say, my house isn't worth that much. So that's the system that we have. And it's in large part because our funding model, specifically for the public schools, is simply wrong. The Constitution does say that the burden of funding our schools falls on the state. However, right now, they're not meeting that threshold, and it's because we're over-reliant on our property taxes. So the South Suburbs has the highest home ownership rate of African Americans in the United States of America. 3 of the top 10 communities in terms of home ownership are in the South Suburbs, with Olympia Fields having one of the highest rates of home ownership amongst African Americans. However, the South Suburbs also have the highest property tax rates in the United States of America. So to anyone who says that there is no correlation between taxes and race, you don't have to look any further than our property tax bills, which come out and are due every March and August, to see that it does. And this attempts to kind of shift that. The other thing that I will say, and as a small business owner, there's some truth to the fact that small business owners are going to see an increase in their property tax, their income taxes. Never in a million years did I think, as a private law firm, you're hanging out a shingle, I could profit over $250,000. Never in a million years would I thought it. Because had I have thought it, I never would have worked at all those other places before going into private practice. But the reality is that small law firms, solo practitioners like myself, as well as other small businesses, because I represent a lot of small business owners in the creation of their small businesses. So an individual I went to high school with, Jeff Nargis, who has an HVAC company, he is potentially going to see a profit of that. He's doing incredibly well. I'm doing incredibly well. but both of us both agree that it only makes sense for us to pay that increased tax because we can afford it. Because when you're seeing over $250,000 worth of profit, you can afford an increase of 1% or 2% or 3% in your income tax. And that's the reality of this, is that we have to say, you know what? The people who can afford an increase in taxes should contribute, because there are a lot of families during this time who can't afford it, and we shouldn't be looking to them to do so in the midst of what's already going on. So the reality is when those commercials come on, small businesses are going to be impacted. The answer is yes. There's no doubt about it. It will be. But if you're a small business that is grossing or netting over 250,000, it's okay to contribute a little bit more to help your fellow person. Because right now in the South Suburbs, we have to do it. I pay over $17,000 a year in property taxes. And I don't even send my daughter to public school. We send her to a private school, so that's another $7,000 that has to be paid. But I have no qualms about paying $17,000 because I know that the other kids can't afford to go to private school and they deserve a good education as well. So that's what comes with community. That's what comes with being a part of something bigger than yourself. And when it comes to Black and brown communities especially, we need all the assistance we can get, and this is an opportunity to do so.
Thank you so much, Mario.
Thank you.
Any questions? You can put them in chat or ask me to unmute you. I can go ahead and unmute anybody.
I don't have a question as much as I have an observation. My background is in education. I started as a teacher in Chicago Public and worked my way up through as a principal, the same system. I was educated in that system. So pre-K through the rest of life was that system. And so I spend a lot of time, especially now with the impact of COVID, dealing with the younger children in our family, making sure that if there are problems related to the platform that's now delivering part of the delivery system in education, that they are getting their lessons. And so I've been working with my niece and she's in the Plainfield School District. She's having a lot of problems. Her child is a special needs problem, is a special needs child. This child is recognized as ADHD presenting, and which means that he has problems with attention span. He has problems with directions. Is a lot of these affective types of problems that will get into the way of delivery of education. And I noted that the correspondence between the special educator and the home, that there was, upon examining his IEP, I saw a lot that was not there. The IEP was addressing the academics and not addressing the affect. So you can't, for a child who has social emotional issues, you're not going to teach that child unless you do something to work with the social emotional to get to the cognitive. Okay. And the teacher was, she was like at a loss for what to do with this. And there's a social worker there. The social worker had some help for her. But what I see is my younger colleague in a position that I never had to be in, working in Chicago. Never had that. At the time I came through, there was plenty of support for educators. And I'm finding that because schools are being so poorly funded, one of the immediate things that's happening is the dichotomy for successful education. The teaching full support on learning is being interrupted. It's being sadly interrupted. And the interruption on that dichotomy is causing us to fail. It's causing us to fail our students. Students don't fail, instruction fails. Learning doesn't fail. Learning is like, it is the thing we want to, as teachers, we want to cause to happen. And instruction is the tool that we use. That tool is being sadly impacted, greatly impacted, by the inability for universities to do a better job at preparing my younger colleagues to do the kind of complex job that they have to do, and do it without a lot of stress and duress, because there's stress on them as well when their students are not learning. And it's just like you're getting a response that's not healthy. It's the parents gonna hold the school responsible for something that the school really can't do at this point because the funding is not there. When I was a principal, we had a contract with DePaul University, and every other Friday, the teachers who were in practice were at DePaul, or DePaul came to them. DePaul was in the building 3 to 4 times a week to impact instruction, because instruction is what helps learners learn. It's the instructional model. And this is not happening. We've got Governor State sitting out here. And what would it look like if that school was able to invest its talent and target districts in various areas, special needs, the African American Learning Platform? But when you don't have money, you can't do that. You're not as effective. But we are looking at what's happening in our communities as a failure, not in the homes, not in the community, but in the failure to bring the resources to the community needed by that community to empower whatever need is there and necessary. That could look like feeding people. That could look like public health, making sure people are healthy. That can look like having healthy schools. The school is not a wherewithal for everything, for every problem. That's the dilution, and that's the breakdown. You don't want to do that. But you do want to have serious connections to those community resources that can help a family that's struggling. That's one of the things we had to reach out and do, was tap into that community. And I taught in Auburn Gresham. I was principal in Auburn Gresham. I taught at the Walt Disney on the north side as a model for the magnets in Chicago. We had to reach out in the community and connect families. That was part of that child coming to school successfully. I went and visited a home of a child who was truant and found out that there was a grandmother and grandfather. Grandfather was totally bedridden. Grandmother was there. She was not doing well at all health-wise. And there was another young child in the house that we knew nothing about. This child's mother had been shot and murdered earlier that year. We knew nothing about this. But I had to get the social worker in there. We had to get counselors connected. We had to do all of these things. We worked with Chicago PD. We worked with everybody we could to make sure that we surrounded families in a way that was going to allow a child to come to school and learn. But if we don't have money, you can't do those things. You can't bring a major university like DePaul in, Urban Edge. You can't get it. You can't do it. To inform, teaching needs to be informed just like medicine on a daily basis. Teachers need that kind of support.
Right.
Where are we going to get it if we can't get the tax issue straight?
And this could certainly do that and provide those services. We are out of time.
Sorry.
It's okay, Connie. You know, it's a valuable information and services that we can fund with that fair tax once we pass it. So thank you so much to everybody for coming.
Thank you,
hope
Holly.
that you'll
Okay, thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thanks for having
I
us.
got your request. I'm going to answer you when I figure it out.
Constance, that was a wonderful reason why we need the evidence-based funding model to be fully funded. Thank you so much for that.
You're welcome. Thank you, Jean. Thank you, Ann.
Goodbye.
Bye-bye,
Yes,
everybody.
Ted.
Thank you so much.
Bye. Bye, everyone.